Good morning. On behalf of the School of Environmental Design, I want to welcome each of you to what we hope will be the first of what we hope will be a long line of lectures from distinguished and noted personalities. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the background, the history of Dr. Fuller, but he probably needs no introduction, but Professor Cordes from the Landscape Architecture Department would like to say a couple of words and give you just a few minutes of background on Mr. Fuller before we ask him to speak. Thank you. Henry?
I have the honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Fuller and introduce this one to you. Who is Dr. Fuller? It is possible to classify him according to our specialization, to our standard, say architect, writer, inventor, cartographer, mathematician. It is possible to associate Dr. Fuller with idea, say geodesic dome, word game, synergy, system, entropy. It is possible to associate Dr. Fuller with his outstanding statement. For example, ephemerization, do more with less. We were not designed to consume our resources. We were designed to use our mind. There are no crises of energy or resources. There are crises of ignorance. Don't fight forces. Use them. System always yield more than goes into it. Parts predict no whole system. Nature is never at lost, never wondering what to do when you and I left off. In the universe, nothing is spent. Nature does not have departments. This is only diffuse, some kind of highland, and again is questioned whether it is possible to associate with Dr. Fuller some of these one ideas. Who is Dr. Fuller? How to classify him? He is the most brilliant thinker of our time, who makes things happen. He is the kind of man who cannot fit to any frame. All are too small for him. To people who are sensitive to a freshness of new idea, he is a hope, guide, and inspiration. Too often he is incomprehensible, too often people do not agree with him. But the more you study his philosophy, it is impossible to disagree with him. For some people, Dr. Fuller is frightening. There is the question and the reason why. He sees the world as something more than the sum of isolated parts. He sees the world synergetically. He senses the trend of human history and is capable to predict the future with brilliant precision in logic. Dr. Fuller is comprehensivist. He is a new type of Renaissance man of 21st century living today. He is a man of unity and synthesis, an age which is coming to us. The topic for today is humans in the universe. I welcome Dr. Fuller.
I'm always really embarrassed by the generosity of the introduction that I received, because I am really convinced that the only thing really very important about me is that I am a very average, healthy human being. And I'm absolutely confident, despite considerable argument we've had on the way here, that there's nothing that I have been able to do that any other healthy human being cannot do. That we're all born geniuses. We all have a great deal more than any of us know to activate and bring to bear on human presence in the universe. That my arriving and doing what I did came really only through my having a break with society and society's assumption of what life really is about, and at age of 32 I really became a throwaway, as I found I could not really get on with the game of how to make a living, and I had dependents and so forth, and anyway, it's a very critical matter really to get yourself where you are a throwaway, and you're really alone and have only one recourse, and that is to do your own thinking and to try to evaluate what you have of experience so far, to see what the significance of our being really here present in the universe may really be, and looking things in a very large way, because it's only through looking things in a very large way that you can begin to discover how come humans in the universe. I was thinking, coming to talk to you and landscape architecture, such a very large architecture school, and driving here and approaching those beautiful white-capped mountains and seeing the stratified clouds of sulfur. Really the sadness, and thinking about this is, what can you do about that at your landscape architecture school? That is the landscape. What are you able to do about it? What are you doing about it? It happens that sulfur is very valuable. Nature doesn't have any such thing as pollution. She has very valuable chemistries, but she has the right chemistry in the wrong places. All because humanity's the way they're organized today is how to make money, how to make livings, how to be very short-sighted. I would think that the very fact that you are students in landscape architecture means that you must have something in you that makes you want to look at things in a larger way, and thinking about the harmony of life that could really be. So to me it's really very sad that no matter what you do about things, a little commission you may have to somebody's park or some little private garden out there, still have to do it under that cloud of the sulfur, whether it's this does not have to be. And we're in a great bind of all humanity, and I couldn't help but on the way here today, as your dean and Mr. Corbett brought me here, Dr. Corbett, the talk about the predicament we're really in. I'm really convinced that humanity is in a very great predicament. That's all humanity. And whether we really come through this predicament or not depends very much not on who we elect or how we delegate authority to somebody else, but what you and I personally do about things. Therefore, I feel a tremendous responsibility in being asked to speak to you, to think out loud about what I've learned, and knowing how really eager you are yourself to learn and to somehow or other make that landscape of our planet a little more favorable for the continuance of human life on board of our planet. I've been given the equipment to sit down here. That is equally hooked up, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it's impressive to me that humans long ago really did think about their total scenery as being something that never belonged to human beings, whether you got to American Indians or we'll get to early Indonesians and so forth. The idea that anybody would own that, what you look at, it would be preposterous. Certainly if you looked at all that sea, you can't own that sea. It's completely out of your control. And so the land and the landscape generally belong to the Great Spirit. And human groups had ranged somehow. They felt that they had fishing rights and hunting rights, growing rights. But this is something that was very small within this. Something belonged to something very much greater. I think I was visiting in Kyoto about 20 years ago, and went to the university there, and the head of the Department of Landscape Architecture took me around Kyoto, and he also wrote for me after conversations that I found so interesting. He wrote out for me an outline of the history of the landscape architecture and so forth, and architecture itself, where first they dealt in the totality of the land. And somewhere locally they began to develop mound forms, and they got mound sculptures and trying to use the total earth undulations, and then doing some of their own. And gradually they got into moving rocks around, and then finally into gravel. They don't get to gardens where they're dealing in the flowers or vegetation until very much later. But it starts really with a sort of land sculpture. But so it really takes you back into the what we find around the world, so much the mound building period, where the extent to which human beings began to deal in their total environment. And they don't get into doing things for way of a house and so forth until very much later. Then they get into the local pavilions within that garden. Otherwise you were really living just in your garden, and then you began to get a pavilion in your garden. So that we come into gradually to details, local details, from dealing in things in a very large way. I like this because they're really coming from the whole to the particular, finding the whole universe beautiful, and then your local planet beautiful, and then you begin to do things that show your respect for some very much greater spirit, very greater intellect that must seem to be operating. I was asked by my friends in Japan about 20 years ago to go to a Shinto ceremony. And the Shinto ceremony was really, we're dealing in the oldest of their religions. And I'm going to tell you what I went through. My host had asked me there, along with I was included in the ambassadors from various countries to Japan to this ceremony. And we'd been on a special train to a special town in Japan. They were going to dedicate a building in an ancient Shinto manner. And I found we had benches. We were in a building. It was a new building, and it had not been finished or anything. So they had benches for us to sit in rows, very much as in any audience or any church. And there were there was a central aisle, and there was really the host had one bank of the seating, and the guests were the other. The local people and the hosts were on one side, sort of like an American wedding, the bride's side and the groom's side. There was an invited public and the home family. And then I was told to just watch what went on very carefully and be ready to do myself what I'd seen the others do. And they had a Shinto priest who came out and did go through the first of the ceremony. Anyway, I sat in the front row, the left-hand side, with these ambassadors. And they had up at the head of the room what we would call carpenters' sawhorses, benches, and we had great planks laid on top of it. And then on top of all the planks were all the fruits and vegetables that grew in Japan, and there were bags of rice, and there were casks of sake and so forth. All the things you're producing out of nature were on display there. And they were up on fairly high horses, so I was thinking that you might call it an altar, the altar being something on high, on display. Then they had a table about halfway between the benches and this display of vegetation. There was a table covered with heaped high with little sprigs of green from like laurel, but rather small leaves. I didn't recognize what it was. Anyway, I'm now going to go through what happened. The priest did what the priest did, and each of the our hosts in the front row, and then the ambassador is supposed to do. And what I was told to do then was to go out and stand in the middle, facing forward to the altar, and about with the aisle between the two sides at my back. And you stood erect, very erect like this. And then you had to suddenly bring your hands like a tap twice, but always having your arms go right back beside like that. And then you went over to the bench that had the table that had all the green twigs on it, and you picked up one of those, and then you went up and put it on top of all the vegetation and the flowers, all the things that were growing up there. Then you came back where you were at the outset, stood right erect like this, and then tap your hands twice like that, and then you go and sit down. This ceremony goes back before they had really any other speech. You're just talking really in gestures, and what quite clearly you were doing, you would clap your hands to get God's attention. God is very busy, and you must clap your hands very hard, twice, so not an accident. God really knows you're running a signal to him. And then you show God, you recognize something to do with green and something to do with the sun, that something grows. And this really is a recognition of chlorophyll and photosynthesis and so forth intuitively. And you take this green which grows, and you take it up and put it on these things as the product of your careful growing, to tell God how pleased you are that you're being allowed to have these things, and you like a lot more of them. Then you go back and clap the hands, so let God go back to his work in a hurry. Now, to me it was the most profound and simple ceremony I've ever been through. And I'd wondered what was going to happen when I went to that ceremony, because I'd been brought up in New England in an era very much earlier than that you are now living in, where we were very local. There were no automobiles. There were just horses and buggies. I was 7 years old when the first automobile came into Boston, and I was 8 when the Wright brothers first flew, and there was no radio. First SOS when I'm 12 years of age. So I was born in the Victorian, very local world, and very tight little community, where everybody knew what everybody else in the community did. If anybody left the community, if you were very rich, you could really go out of the community and come back as a traveler. That's a dignified thing to do. But if you left the community and not a rich man, you're a vagabond and just running away. If you're any good, you're supposed to stay put. Everybody knew all about you. Therefore, the religious life was very well known, which church you belonged to and so forth. And I was brought up to save pennies and any little things I could get to take to Sunday school, so that we could get some money so the missionaries could go to talk to the poor heathens. And I was really brought up that all the people around the world are tremendously ignorant about God, and I happened to be in on the inside where we knew a little about it, and we were going to send these missionaries to help people about God. So I wondered how powerful my conditioned reflexes were when I was going to go to the Shinto ceremony. Would I find myself being askance? But to really go through what I did, I said, I never have been through anything with such respect for really spontaneous personal awareness of God. And in Japan, you find some places elsewhere in the Orient, you find just the roof shape going down through much of Malaysia and Indonesia is just simply that of a boat turned upside down. They have the turtle, and that is, you have two columns and a keel shape. You see that somewhere in the wilderness in Japan, and if you were to get out of your car and walk over and walk through it, you find it really is a doorway to a great temple, where there's places on your planet, as you know yourself very well, where suddenly it's an extraordinary view, and suddenly it's a very special sight where you really realize that it's almost mystically important. And these stories built that way, so they are really a doorway into God's own great temple. Otherwise, you don't need a roof, and God doesn't need any roof there. The universe is a temple, and so you simply go through that kind of gateway. I say all these things really to try to get us back into thinking about how humans long ago have reasoned out the extraordinary. All human beings are being born naked, helpless, ignorant, hungry, thirsty, curious, having to find their way by trial and error, no other way, and make mistake after mistake, but gradually finding out what works, and realizing that there is a logic, that if you do this, you can get that kind of result, that the universe is operating on some very important rules. And you have then realized that there's really an intellectual planning capability that has the right things there for you. If you really make the right experiments, you're going to find out. So there's a direct, really expression of respect for a greater intellect operating in the universe that clearly manifests there. And I'm saying this today because we've gotten to the point now where little human beings found places where they could get on, and then they were invaded by others and began to guard. I'm trying to get to there's a very extraordinary moment that occurs in relation to the land which you're concerned with, and I think I'll just retrace this. We have manifested in ecology, behavior patterns of various living organisms, and amongst the mammals we have, for instance, the wild horses. There's once in a while a large young stallion is born. He didn't ask to be, but he's just bigger. And there's a king stallion, there's a very big one, and he challenges this young big stallion. They have a big battle, and whichever one wins is the one which will then inseminate the herd. And it was the way Darwin saw that nature had arranged to keep the strongest strain, physically strongest strains going. And I'm sure that human beings early were born once in a while as a bigger man, and his physical big stature is exploitable, and little people ask the big man to reach something they can't reach. And then they ask the big man to protect them when other people attack them, when their tribe is being attacked, and they have some good life resources, and people who have lost all their life resources are absolutely desperate and are coming to kill them. They ask the big man to get out in front to protect them. And finally, big man found himself being exploited for his bigness. And he finally said, if I continually have to risk my life out there protecting your lives, I've got to organize things between these battles of protection so that I'll be a little better prepared. So I need to have some weapons. I'd like to have society, our community, our tribe, getting ready for this next emergency. So they said, all right, we'll make you king. He just sort of became, the power structure became power structure just by virtue of it being physically bigger. And this might go back to a period of giants. Anyway, we have a time which occurred after the last ice age, when the ice began to recede, where the ice had used up an enormous amount of the water of our planet, of the oceans, so the oceans had dropped very much. It did not, the coastline didn't go much further out, just went, the water lowered and was pretty much the same pattern. This meant then that so much of the water was being used up that great peninsulas occurred. For instance, the Malay Peninsula then began to include, and then did include the last ice age, Borneo, Java, Sumatra, the Philippines. New Guinea was part of the continent of Australia, but what had been islands suddenly became land, and the ice pushed all the animals down into the tropical area. So that suddenly the people on the land, and they've been on islands before, that suddenly they're faced with great animals that they hadn't seen before. And they learned to domesticate many of them, and they learned how then to hunt some of them, and they learned to tame horses, and gradually got onto horses and began to live on some of the meats of these animals instead of on the sea product and the vegetation. And as the ice receded, a great many people followed north, and they began following north with their herds of sheep and goats, and have some of this big man who was the head of his tribe. He's a great herder, and he's off in the wilderness, and they've been generation after generation, and the big man is the great head of the tribe as they wander through the wilderness. When suddenly up comes a little man on a horse, and he's got a club, and he rides up to the big man, big shepherd, and says, "Look, beautiful sheep you got there, some very beautiful sheep. You know, it's pretty dangerous to have those sheep out here in the wilderness." And the shepherd said, "We never have any trouble out here. We've been here for generation after generation." And they just wander around wherever the sheep take them, and they look out for them. They able then to live on the meat, and they use their skins for making their clothing and their tents, and they're able to get in a much colder area than they've been able to live in before. There's some environment control here. And a lot of the sheep disappear during the night, and the man appears on the horse the next day and says, "Oh, I told you it's very dangerous out here. Really, it's really terrible for you to have all those valuable sheep out here without it. What you need is protection." And this is the beginning of what we call the mafia. Anyway, after a while, the shepherd yields and said, "All right, I'll take your protection." Then sheep don't disappear. But the man on the horse says, "This is your range now. This is as far as you can go." And now this way, the little man on a horse with a club is able then to, for the first time, overpower the big man. In other words, we have cleverness beginning to change the power structure to being clever, and to do a lot of planning, and so then this turns out to be a very favorable kind of a racket where the man doesn't have to do any work. He's able to live on the product of the sheep and so forth, the product of other people's work. And then others begin to see that's a great game, so there are battles between people on horses about to see the territories, and gradually they get territories that they can guard, and they have a castle, stone castle, and they come pouring out on our horses with all these horsemen to overwhelm others. But then it turns out somebody else organizes themselves like that with the horses and the spears and the swords, and so they begin to find out they get into territory and the ownership of land or control of land. This is the first time where it came in the idea that human beings would own and control land. And that's really probably only since our last ice age. And the last ice age started away only about 30,000 years ago. So this land owning phenomenon is a really very recent phenomenon. I just wanted to get on and understand how some very big patterns enter into our life. And with that land proprietorship, then the strongest man on that horse, or the cleverest of them all, then has all of his helpers, and he then gives them territories within his bigger territory. And the enormous battles are associated tribes on horses, rather these great horsemen, and they finally get to an emperor of a larger territory. This is very much the kind of pattern we really have of the Orientalists. We first begin to know anything about it. And where the horse was playing this enormous part. And from there on we begin to get into different kind of patronage where we have really a living God. It's interesting if we go to places like Cambodia, which is, for the moment, you and I can't go. And luckily I went to Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom several times before the present undesirable set of events have been going on in that part of the world. Maybe not undesirable, but the present evolutionary set of events bringing about warring. And there was Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom. These are and if you flew over that area, it was fascinating to see all the canals, because these were where water people came in on the land, and the ice age began to go away, and the waters melted, began to separate islands. These water people had ways of coming up on the mainland further, built canals into the land. You see, enormous amount of canals. And then they came to a model, an Angkor Wat or Angkor Thom was a model. It wasn't a temple as you and I think about, or a church at all. It was a model of the universe, what they decided the universe was. They'd long ago discovered a North Star, Pole Star, and that state, they began to realize that the water people, that they really were on a sphere. But there was an axis then that was a permanent axis involved. So they had a north, their model of the world showed them that you have land, and the further you went inland, the more big mountains you're liable to come to. And if you went out away from the mountains, you finally got to the water. There was always water. So they had their Angkor Wat was a square pattern of building, and it was the canal system from the sea came in with all water around it. It was a great square moat finally, and they went across a bridge of stones so they got into the land itself. And there they had going completely around the outer edge of that Angkor Wat was a great sea serpent, Naga. Naga was the god of the sea, and Naga surrounded your pattern or model of what the universe seems to be. So as you go inland on Angkor Wat or Angkor Thom, you come then to higher and higher pinnacles of mountains. So they're simply models of mountains. They're not something you go into. They had porticos. You could walk around the outside of it, but you could go in on this mountain structure. Later on, much later on, when Buddhism comes along, they began to have Buddha sitting around these mountains. They began to make secondary pavilions. To start off with, it's simply a model of what the world is like. Land is always surrounded by water, and you know there's an east and a west, there's a setting of the sun and a rising of the sun, and you got that pole star, so they had its four corners. So they assumed really our earth, what everything we know about it is something that goes to an infinite ocean around it, and there's this land. Then these different mountains were at this point you're getting to where you're getting to be some cleverer people, and you begin to realize that either the big man who's the power structure must be ordained by God. But there are gods, and each of these living gods or semi-god builds one of these models of the world, and he has a mountain that he can get up onto when he dies to get a little closer to the greater gods. They assume that there's a greater God than the living God, but he's a living God, and he's entitled to get up on one of these mountains a little higher. So he better build that during his lifetime so he has a mountain to climb up on when he dies to get to join the other gods. But it is interesting to realize that these are then thought of not as something you go into as a temple, but actually as a cosmological model. I'd just like to look back what we know about back there. Incidentally, some of you may know and some of you may not know, but in our organization of our information to explain our history, we've had, as I was brought up, civilization began in the Middle East, and it is assumed that that's where the earliest life came, where human beings went from being Stone Age to Bronze Age, because that's where the first bronzes were found. So it was assumed that that's where the civilization began, because it's a little more advanced, getting into bronze, where you had a little tensile capability over stone, which had really no high tensile capability whatsoever. And this has been the way history is explained until a few years ago. some excavations in northeast Thailand, a place called Ban Chang, produced some very extraordinary artifacts and some very extraordinary bronzes. And designs in those bronzes and in the pottery were very different from anything before else we were familiar with. And what was impressive about the bronzes there was that in northeast Thailand we have tin and copper. In order to make bronze you have to have tin and copper. And it's important to realize that in the Near East, while we had Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, and the name is Kupus or copper. That is, we had copper in the Near East in that island of Cyprus, but there was no tin. In order then to make bronzes, they had to go all the way out through the Gibraltar and up the east coast of the Atlantic, up till they got up to England. That's where the tin came from. So it was anything but occurring locally, and so it really began to shed some doubt on the which was the earliest of the bronzes. It's while it's easy with the carbon-14 to demonstrate things where you have any biological life, identifying ages of bronzes is a more difficult affair. But anyway, the University of Pennsylvania was asked to produce a team of scientists to handle the excavations at Ban Chang in northeast Thailand. And there's a Dr. Gorman of the University of Pennsylvania who has very great capability of guarding the bronzes. And this last year, it was demonstrated to the satisfaction of all the metallurgists that this bronze of northeast Thailand is earlier than the Middle East one. So quite clearly we begin to know now that civilization as we've known it comes from that Southeast Asia, comes out of the water and up onto the land. And it had been misthought up to then that China had an earlier civilization and the bronzes gradually came down into Southeast Asia, but now we know it's the other way. I'm saying these things because they relate to you as landscape architects. I want you to begin to think about your total planet, and I'm sure you've already been thinking about it spontaneously, but it's important for us to begin to assess some of these big things that nature's done to our total planet, because we have had, to our knowledge now, we've had 4 ice ages, and they come about 1 million years apart, and there's about a 250,000 years between them. Although not absolutely regular, but it almost looks like a wave pattern of a million years between peaks. And then there's a melting, there's a very short period when there just really is no ice in this part. Anyway, the Leakey brothers, Leakey and father and son, and Mr. Leakey, and they have a beautiful new book just came out a few days ago, Origins, which is very worth everybody looking at. It takes you back to where we have really very healthy human beings on our planet here through 2 ice ages. That we've been able to get through 2 ice ages with human beings born naked, helpless, ignorant. Obviously were not born on the ice. They obviously had to be born in a place where it was possible for human beings to be helpless as we are for months. A great big chunk of meat lying there for quite a few months, can't move itself around. We have to be where there be very few or no wild animals that would eat up such a chunk. And we get to the most logical place where life could possibly start would be the coral atolls of the South Pacific and Indian Ocean. They're absolutely logical for it. And where the coral atolls, where they're built on a volcano, so it's a very recent land form compared to the other land forms of the major land. And there's no time for any animals to go. But there was times to develop the coral reef, and then sands, and then trees, and so there are fruits and all kinds of things. So some of the coral reefs are a beautiful barrier reef to break the great sea, and inside of it you have these lovely lagoons, still waters, and lovely shoaling sand, beaches you can wade, and the water temperature is such that you can live in it all day and no detriment to life whatsoever, but abounding with fish, much easier to get at those fish in the shoal waters with sand to see it, and you can walk up on the beach very easily, and there are all the great trees and coconuts full of coconut milk and fruits. So there was beautiful life support and really no animal challenge to to the human beings there. So I would think that this is probably where the humans started and gradually learned to do all kinds of things on water. Because in the lagoon they could learn that a tree floats and a stone sinks. That a tree, if you strip it of its branches, it rotates and rolls. But if you have two of those logs and one branch come down on the other, stops them rotating if you're fastened. So they learn to make a catamaran. And they learn that the catamaran, if you just think about two logs, the ends like this have no resistance this way, but this way have great resistance. So that if you had two logs like this, if the wind is blowing on them, they will not just blow this way at all, but they will go in the direction of least resistance. So they've learned then that to plate the leaves on the trees and to make sails and to put down a little steering device so that even the wind blowing this way, they can sail a little bit into the wind. They actually go as direction of least resistance. And I'm sure that human beings learn to develop dugouts, but the sailing would take them distances that their muscle could really not take them, because the muscle had to be fed. It took too much on board to feed the muscle, so that they covered much greater distances in their rafts, either drifting or gradually sailing. For a long time they drift northward and eastward, following the great Japan current, takes you up coast of Japan and Kamchatka, and then Bering Straits and down, doesn't cross, but down Alaska, and finally gets down to South America and then turns around. We have an actual circuit of water of the Pacific, which I'm sure the rafting people follow, and that's what Thor Heyerdahl proved, that you have such currents. At any rate, I'm sure the early human beings were then learning to go along with those rafts. And I want you to think about if you're on a raft day after day, and there's great, incredible skies, and you've got your relationship to each night, as you're drifting, the patterns are a little different. And you begin to learn something about both time and repetitions of the year, when things reappear in the same kind of way. Also, discovering, you begin to see the top of a mountain, then gradually begin to see more of the mountain, then you finally get down to seeing the beach. And then as you go away, you lose the top. You begin to discover that you're always on a hill. If you're always on a hill, you have to reason, if you're out there for year after year, that you're really on a sphere. I'm quite certain that these early people, the early raft people, really understood we're on a sphere and got into very powerful navigation kind of capability. But they were having to really yield to where the currents took them. Then we have a second phase when they begin to sail, and they're able to go into the wind to the westward, and began then to discover the great Asian mainland, and they're introduced to it very powerfully by that ice age of the water sinking and so forth. So there's suddenly a civilization coming out of the sea and up onto the land. Much to be learned from all this by you, because I'm saying all these things to you because I'm convinced that humans are going to stay on our planet, and we're going to stay on here for even much more than a decade. It's going to be because we're going to start dealing in our planet as a single spaceship. At the present time, we have most unreasonable set of conditions where that land claiming went on, of the power structures, whether they're political or financial, but whoever commands power, and the power and commands the guns, and by cleverness is able then to keep their power structure going. We have those powers and who divided up the earth into their territories and domains, and there are 150 of them today. We have one spaceship Earth, we have 150 sovereign states, 150 sovereign admirals. And we have then, let's think of this as a ship with 150 staterooms. So we have stateroom 13 trying to overwhelm stateroom 28. And we have the staterooms ganging up and finally get to where the starboard side is organized to sink the port side of the ship. We're in that absolute nonsense right now. Unless we get rid of all this nonsense, we get back to the fact that we're all part of that great earth. With those early rafting people, I'm sure, and the early sailors began with there's just one earth. And they thought that kind of way. If we're going to stay here, it's because we're going to regain this concept of the whole planet is yours. So your landscaping concerns from now on, if we really make it here, is going to be the whole earth. Very important for you to kind of think about it that way. How you get that whole landscape really working for all humanity. I think it's fascinating that in the hands of the landscape architect, who's really in a sense been sort of coming as sort of exterior decorator in the game of making money, and power structures, sort of something, either luxury that you might get to, that suddenly you may be really having much the most important part of the whole game, where the people are designing, supposedly designing buildings. The architects themselves don't design buildings. The buildings are designed by the clients, by the banks, by the labor unions, by Sweet's catalog, time saver standards. The little architect is just a pencil pusher. So that the landscape architect is a little freer. He's out there dealing, his real patron is nature. You're really dealing much more with God. And I find it really a fascinating challenge to be asked to come and talk to just a landscape group in this particularly challenging moment of humans on our planet. To try to think about the largest responsibility you really have, and how you're going to really have to get on with everybody and understand. Now, here, fortunately for humanity, we have almost a quarter of all humans are in China. And they are really organizing themselves on the basis of everybody or nobody. And they come out of that long landscape where you really do have a God who's a priori, and you don't need any special church and so forth. There's an enormous wisdom that is still operative there. And I'm certain that the Chinese are going through planning stages, and as they complete this plate, they're going to open up into a very much larger attitude towards the total. And so I expect that I would think it would be very important for all of you to try to study everything you can about the early Oriental handling of the land, to think about that landscape, as I told you. I don't know whether any books have been written by that professor at Kyoto. I was told he was the greatest expert on this subject, but he did give me a bibliography of which if anybody wants to write to my office, I'm sure we can dig that up. Now, I never prepare, and I'm not a lecturer, and I never prepare anything. I really learned that I can't prepare who I may run into down the street, some old friend. So I wait. I really, every situation really develops its own thoughts, and so I've come to you completely that way. And the only challenge I had was that you're all landscape. I was told you're all under the auspices of landscape architecture, at least. Not so? How many of you are landscape architects, please? Show hands. No, let me take a good look. Is about, what did you think, a third? 25%?
Looks like it.
Will you keep your hands up, all of you in landscape? Will you stand up and look, please, with me?
51%.
Well, about 75% of you are now entering landscape architecture. But I'm sure that the patterns I've been talking about are intimately interesting to all of you. But it is interesting for those who are not landscape architects to really have a sense of what the circumstances are tending to induce in the kind of thinking that brought me into trying to think about our total spaceship Earth as a landscape. We're all familiar with that extraordinary picture now of taking photographs of our planet as it comes from outer space. Remember Robert Burns saying, would that God the gift would give us to see ourselves as others see us. And we really thought that, I remember when I was 32 in Chicago, there was a little town outside of Chicago, Bolivar, and it was named for the leader. His name was Bolivar, and there was something like 30,000 people who lived there who were absolutely convinced that the earth was a flat plane that went to infinity. And I haven't heard much about Bolivar recently since those photographs are taken coming from where you can see it as a sphere. And the beautiful blueness and the beautiful brownness that you can see, and that beautiful cloud cover. On the way here, I was saying to my host and Dr. Cordes and the dean that I found our whole society today engaged in an enormous game started by power structure, where the power structure then learns that to conquer, divide to conquer, also to keep conquered, keep divided, and that our whole political power structures on our planet, or our financial power structures, which are not individual but great corporations, they're great aggregates of lawyers and clever people, keep humanity completely specialized. By being specialized, they're divided. And as a specialist, there's nothing you can do about what's going to go on in society except leave it to your political leader. Or leave it to, in fact, you don't have anything to do with it, your great corporation takes the lead. Where humanity today has really nothing to do, no matter how displeased you may be with things, or things you think need to be done, there's nothing you can do about it. We're, as specialists, we are really completely in jeopardy. I recalled on the way down here that it was approximately 20 years ago that the American Association of Advancement of Science, having its annual Congress in Philadelphia, filled all the hotels with all the different specialists, and the different floors of the hotels with different specialists. And there were two research papers that were presented in that Congress 20 years ago to the scientists, which I was really just lucky enough in reviewing papers to find these two, because they were not presented in any coordinated manner. The scientists who were on the teams that were presenting these papers were unaware of this other team and its scientists. One of these papers was a research paper in anthropology by scientists who were reviewing all the known case histories of human tribes that have become extinct. The biological team was reviewing all the known case histories of biological species that have become extinct. Both teams, completely unknown to the other, but very logically, were trying to find something common in all the cases of extinction. Both teams did find something in common, and both were able to say to their respective areas of science that extinction was quite obviously the consequence of over-specialization. We have thought we've been brought up that specialization is desirable. You're going to get a special advantage. In the game, you have to earn a living. The power structure said, you got to earn a living, my satisfaction. One of my jobs, because another thing about the power structure is keep everybody busy. No matter what it is, but keep them busy so they and preoccupied with their specialty. This way they're innocuous and completely exploitable. And all the great conquerors of India have been sure that every religion was there, was continued, because that kept people divided. Every language that they had, they said, your language is beautiful, keep on with it. Your language is beautiful, don't let anybody take it over. They kept everybody divided in as many ways they could in class. This way, utterly victimized to power structures. Now, in this picture of the specialization and leading to extinction, I'd like to give you the reason why this occurs in biological manner, because you and I are biological organisms. We have you're familiar with what we call inbreeding. You can take two fast-running horses and marry them, and the probability is that you concentrated the fast-running genes a little bit, and you're liable to get a faster-running horse, and that does work. This is the method, this mathematical probability of concentrating the genes which you don't know which they are, but they quite clearly, they have the genes that make them go fast. So you do this with any kind of biological species. But as you do that, you have then, you concentrate a special one, but you do so at the expense of general adaptability. I'll give you a beautiful fundamental case history of a type of bird that lives on marine life that occurs in the meadows by the sea, in the marshes, the salt marshes. And these birds then learn by flying, they can see where those marshes are, and they're down in there. And we have one of the ice ages beginning to occur. So gradually the waters in those marshes begin to lower and lower. And only the birds with long beaks can reach down in these holes in the marshes to get at the sea life. The short beakers just simply die off because they can't get the sustenance. This means that when the procreation urge of those birds occurs, long beakers only have long beakers to marry with. So as the waters recede further and further, they tend to concentrate, and the ones that have the longest beaks still are the ones that are surviving. So there's enormous concentration on big beaks. And finally, they get to where the water is very deep. Now the marshes are drying up, and suddenly there's a forest fire, and the marsh didn't used to burn because it used to be so wet, but suddenly the whole thing burns. And these birds suddenly, after generations, their beaks are so big they can't fly anymore. I want you to understand how extinction is a consequence of over-specialization, losing the general adaptability which was in the flying. That's the general adaptability. And so the untoward events are always ones that least frequently occurring. And in the specialization you get organized to get on with the most frequently occurring set of events in a given environment. At any rate, I say that humanity is in a very critical moment. Every one of us are born fundamentally comprehensivist, interested in everything. This brings us something really very relevant to landscape architecture, which is the word ecology. And the word ecology, we begin to learn that there's an intercomplementary set of events going on in all the living organisms and their relationship to the environments themselves, the geological set of events. And we come then to trying to study and identify human beings in contradistinction to all the other living organisms with which they coexist and intercomplement one another on board of our planet. We find that what is unique to human beings, what is unique is really what all the other living species other than the human beings have. As all the other living species other than humans have some built-in organic equipment which is part of their actual body that gives them special advantage in special environments. We have a little vine that can grow and prosper up in the Amazon, but no place else. And very beautiful right there. We have those birds which can then fly when they're in the sky and get on beautifully, but when they're not flying, cannot divest themselves of their wings. So they're greatly hampered in trying to walk. You watch a bird trying to walk around. And we have in humans then not just brains, because many other creatures have brains, and the brains of all creatures are always and only coordinating the special information inputs of their senses. The way this one smells is distinct from the way that one smells. The way this one sounds, the way this one feels, hot, cold, rough. We have the way then each one of them looks. And the brains are just coordinating those inputs of our four prime senses. But then we have human mind, and human mind has extraordinary capability from time to time of discovering relationships existing between special case parts of a system that are not in any of the special case parts by themselves. There's a relationship, as for instance, the planets of the sun, which took the human beings gradually learn after millions of years of stimulation of something going on in the sky, of 5 lights behaving differently from the seemingly fixed stars. We get to the point where, as a compounding of information of Copernicus, of Tycho Brahe, Kepler, Galileo, right? Newton is able to identify the interaction between these celestial bodies as varying as a rate of the second power in relation to the arithmetical distances of power. These are relationships existing between, where this becomes then known as the gravitational law, and is found to hold true in all cases. This we call a scientific generalization. And if you ask Mr. Newton what gravity is, he says, nothing, I can't tell you. It's a relationship, because there's nothing you can point to that has it all by itself. This is a refraction between, and there's not of. So we have then, this is then behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behaviors of parts. And part of the system universe itself, or eternally regenerative universe, is this gravitational behavior of the inter-attraction of masses and so forth. And these generalizations are, to qualify, must have no exception, therefore they are inherently eternal. Now this brings a great difference between the brain. The brain is always dealing with special cases, and all the special cases begin and end. They begin and end like we go to sleep and wake up smelling something different, whatever it may be. All these special cases of the brain are terminal. The brain then thinks in beginnings and endings. It is the brain that asks humanity to explain how the universe began, how the universe is going to end. You must prove it again and again. The science that requires experimental evidence uses mathematical tools that have no experimental evidence whatsoever, ought to give you great pause. Show me a model of square root of -1. Give me a model. Give me experimental physical evidence of square root of -1. Give me experimental evidence of pi. If you've got to learn anything about your mathematics, you learn that pi cannot be resolved. How could nature use something that can't be resolved? Nature can't be using something that means you can never divide it up, because you wouldn't know how to divide it. Nature would be completely stymied if it had to use pi. Every one of the irrational constants of science make it absolutely clear that science is simply playing a very intricate mathematical game in order to get in. It's not really doing so consciously. It's not a conspiracy of science today, but it was a conspiracy long ago of those who were the monopolists of calculating capability, which was in the priesthood and so forth, who had great power over the king because he could do the calculating. And he learned his calculating from being one of the great navigators, one of the great navigator priests of Egypt or Mesopotamia, who had enormous control over the physical power of man. So they monopolized that capability and kept it hidden. And so that the game of mathematics, of going in to understand science, is such that the 99% of humanity are all beautiful scientists, and much more scientists than people who call scientists, because they want experimental evidence. They want to be able to use their senses. They want it out in front of them. There's nothing wrong with that 90% of humanity. They're very brilliant. But they want real experimental evidence, and science doesn't give it to them. They say you got to learn all this nonsense of getting into the calculus where you're dealing in X, Y, Z perpendicular coordinates. Nature doesn't have any perpendiculars or any, she has no straight lines. She has only waves. She has no solids. We teach the kids in school about solid geometry. And physics is so dishonest that they talk about solid state physics when they know there are no solids. I'm simply saying to you is that we're in for a very great revolution. It's going to turn out that science is wacky. All the fascination, pretense, and so on have been greatly revered because, yes, they've found. I want you to think about somebody who learned by actual exploring how to find his way over great mountain paths. He found a trail like early Indians. You got a guide. He really knows his way, and he can take you through night, and he can take you through fog. He learned how to go along with his feet on this path in the dark, and so forth. Science does have ways of getting arithmetical agreement in the end with physical data. We're trying to get agreement with what experimental evidence is, but they go by most circuitous ways of doing cobwebs in the dark in relation to X, Y, Z coordinates. We have to go along the edge of the floor and then up the corner of the room to try, and you go along two corners to try to find out something out in the middle of the room. So you have cobwebs in the dark, and you learned how to do mathematics of cobwebs in the dark. Where science says there's no models at all in here. We're really great. We've invented abstraction, where you really discovered some generalization. That's all. It's not abstraction. I said there's generalizations in the special cases, but simply algebra is a certain amount of generalization. Very beautiful thing where you can use empty sets. But we carry this much, much too far in the games of probability and so forth. As Einstein said, I don't think God is shooting craps. Now, I'm talking some pretty big, severe things in relation to your lives. Anyway, come back then to the generalized principles and discovering that they're eternal. Because they are eternal, they're all co-occurrent. They're called cooperative. We look at them as a group. We find the most important thing about it that none of them ever contradicts any of the others, and that many of them are interaugmentative. When you and I use the word design in contradistinction to randomness, we mean the word design really an intellectual selection. We always mean for our intellect when we talk about design. We say it's really the parts are arranged in view of the others. That's a design. And when we get into the great generalized principles that are operative in the universe, of very few, they're all interaccommodative, is really a great design. That human beings have been given mind or access to some of the great design of the universe. But humans themselves have been given that. So humans then have been able then, gradually by experiment, the Wright brothers learned what kind of a wing foil works, and they get it working all right, and how to structure it, which is a great, brilliant success with the compression struts and the differentiated tension compression, and try to do two at once. And got this thing flying. But then we have Bernoulli discovering pressure differentials in gases and mathematical laws of pressure differentials in gases, the way the patterns we get. So we have developed then the knowledge of the airflow around wing foils. Out of that we're able to develop the mathematics of flow and where we get the low pressure fix and so forth. Out of it, human beings then, using generalized principle, Bernoulli principle, we're able then to develop wings where you and I can put on the wings and fly 10 times faster than the bird and much higher. And when I'm not using wings, you can have the wings. We have interchangeable wings. And we can melt up our wings and make much better wings. We have the capability now to actually dive deeper than the whale and faster. We outperform all the specialists in all the special environments by access to principles. That's the complete difference between human beings and the others. We have the greatest general adaptability, which is omnidirectional, to use principles, to be allowed in on the generalized principles of the universe. Now, when I talk about behaviors of whole systems unpredicted by behavior in any of their parts, that's all that we have in these generalized principles. They are not in the parts, but they are relationships between, so they are then systems. This is the word synergy. Synergy means behavior of whole systems unpredicted by behavior in the parts considered only separately. And the word synergy, while it's very old historically, has only been used very recently in any popular way. And now it's being very popular because everybody suddenly, just in the 60s, began to discover ecology. There was interrelationship of all these living phenomena. Suddenly discovering what we thought were the side effects. And we were doing this, and the side effects of that sulfur in that sky out there in front of those beautiful white mountains. These side effects, we begin to learn that nature gives us drives to do various things, but the side effects are the main effects. Ecology is then the honeybee goes after his honey and inadvertently cross-pollinizes it. Ecology is run that way in order to get all these creatures that don't have any minds or brains to cooperate and do the right thing. Nature then gives them chromosomic drives to be all specialists to do this, but how does she coordinate the specialists? By having a specialist do this, but its byproduct becomes the ecology. The total thing being completely interregenerative, where every worm counts and every insect counts, all the chemistries count, is all incredible in the complementary design. So we find the universe is operating synergetically. Ecology is synergy. To whatever extent they make you a specialist, this de-synergizes you. Doing exactly the opposite. How do you get on with the whole? Where you have nothing to do, and somebody has to depend on some kind of coordinating officialdom, some bureaucracy that holds things together. We're really in a very, very great bind on our planet, because I'm quite confident that inasmuch as every little child is interested in the macrocosm, the microcosm, has most beautiful questions, they're synergetic from the outset. You say, darling, never mind, wait till we get to school, and then you give them 1, 2, 3, never mind the universe, you give them 1, and 2, and 3, and then say, learn that and give you 4, 5, 6. We make them what we call elementary schools. We break them into elements, into parts. Now, there's no use in being displeased with what we're experiencing. What really counts, I'd say, is what can you and I do right now about the fact that we really are in this predicament? What can we do individually and constructively? I asked myself that question 50 years ago. I said quite clearly, I remember a few years ago, if I get up in a soapbox and ask the world to listen to me, there are 4 billion people, and I'm not going to get anywhere. What I can do is participate in nature's own way of coping. Nature does everything we call environment is nature. Nature has done exactly what she has done. The little vines that gets on in the Amazon or whatever it may be. These are all her way of developing the coping. She develops then organic systems. She develops what I call artifacts. Human beings can make artifacts. I find then our capability to use our intellect to employ principles and to design is then the one way we can really cope. I'm able, this brought me long ago, back in 1917 during World War I, when I was in the Navy, realizing that I was in a new age that was having an airplane and a radio and extraordinary new kind of steels and all kinds of power structures, and the electron in a very big way, that had an X-ray and all kinds of knowledge about chemical elements. A new era. And I began to realize that the very essence of the warfaring of the power structures themselves, who's going to be the top power structure, meant then the military. And I saw that all the great political systems were saying, experience teaches us there's nowhere nearly enough life support on our planet. We have the fairest, most logical, most ingenious way of coping with lethal inadequacy of life support. We can't guarantee you'll even make it on our side, but you get a better chance on our side. Before the political system said this, we have the religion saying you can't make it at all, but we be your advocate, we can get you into the next world, and everything's going to be great over there. So you join our religion and everything will be fine when you get over the other side. But we have in our present religions, the political system say you might make it on this side, but you have a better chance on our side than otherwise. There's working assumption that the great ignorance of human beings born, naked, helpless, ignorant, not seemingly is enough to go around. Not understanding, and here's 99% of humanity not understanding anything about technology, because they can't understand science, and that 99% thinking then that technology is something new and only related to the weapons which the power structure produces. Or it relates to the machinery which the power production system uses to exploit. So they say we don't like technology, not realizing that the universe is the most incredible technology. That's what all these general laws are about, generalizations are. The universe has all incredible technology of how my hand is cooperating with me, doing just what I want, why my hair's been coming out, I don't have anything to do with it. I don't have anything to do with what's happening to my breakfast. No, I'm 99.9999% automated, most incredible technology. Each one of us has over quadrillion atoms in our brains superbly designed to you and I communicating like this. There's incredible technology where the technology, all those sunspots you and I don't understand, has all to do with how we're getting on this whole planet right now. Every bit of this universe completely interrelated, and it's all of its designing. So we have this 99% illiterate, scientifically illiterate society thinking technology is something bad and design. Instinctively say, let's get back to the land, I can grow some potatoes or something. But sort of an individual escapist idea from the mess. But we do have the capability to make it on our planet, and I now know that is so, and I don't do this by opinion, but I do it by actually what I started developing going back to 1917, when I realized that the power structure, when they came to finding how they 3/4 of the earth was covered with water, whoever controlled the ocean controlled the lines of supply. They were then to take the tin from the Malay Straits. They could bring that to America, and you combine it with the iron from the Sabi Range, and you could take the manganese from southern Russia and bring the three together, and you could make a tin can, and you could preserve the food that used to rot. You could preserve it so the food could reach the people. The people didn't have to go where the roots are anymore. This is what I mean by artifacts, and using principles by competent design, we began to take care of more people. And just in my lifetime, we doubled life expectancy on the planet by simply knowing a little more about the artifacts, how to use principles a little better. And those principles get being used only because they're first used for the military. And our great ignorance is saying not enough to go around. Nobody ever tries to take science and apply it to how to make humanity a success. We have medicine as palliative, how to get you well, but not how to make you a success. We have then military undertaking this extraordinary technology because they can send a missile a greater distance, more accurately, faster, greater hitting power. So science has been let loose only in the technology of the weaponry. In 1917, I saw that we were learning then how to use information to do more with less, where suddenly, instead of having to send a ship across the Atlantic to carry a message, I could send it with a few pounds of radio. When I suddenly got the right alloy, and I could, very much lighter structure, could do much more. Suddenly discovered, in what's called that solid then, that there were partial resistance and so forth, and able to develop all the circuitry we have in electronics today. I saw then that you could possibly do so much with so little. If you really understood the principles, generalized principles of our operating in the universe, and did apply the right technology, you might someday be able to take care of everybody. But it would mean then taking the high science and applying directly to the home front, what I call livingry, in contradistinction to weaponry. I have then direct logistic information about environment controlling. On the way down here, just talking to architecture professors, however, landscape architecture, but the whole school of architecture, saying that when people don't even know what buildings weigh, you don't talk about what buildings weigh. What do buildings have to do besides keep off the rain or break up the wind a little? And if you don't, you need, how many tons is this building? How many tons is this building? Anybody in this room? Anybody tell me within 100,000 tons? Anybody tell me within 1,000,000 tons? If you don't know what buildings weigh, you obviously know what you're getting out of your performance per pound. And you have to know at sea or it'll sink. Your ship will sink. And you have to know it go in the sky because you have to lift that weight in the sky. Spend energy to do it. We know exactly what a Boeing 747 weighs. We know what a rate of climb is, how much she carries, what a cruise rate. You know the whole performance, everything she's supposed to do. You know exactly what you put in weight of materials, ergs of energy, and seconds of time. And we don't even know what buildings weigh, let alone that. Our whole living way is utter ignorance. So I've got into the game of applying this to living 50 years ago. Now I know what I'm talking about. Because I now know that I can give you environment controls for given earthquakes. You needn't worry about earthquakes at all in a geodesic structure, I'll show you, any more than a bell buoy has to worry about the waves in the ocean. I now know how to give you environment controls for a given set of performances or requirements, being earthquake proof, whatever, all the proofings you want. I can do it and give you this for only, I can give you 300 buildings for one against the best known alternate engineering strategy for these large clear span enclosures. 300 for one. And no limit to the size. Anyway, I now know just what I am talking about. I know the energy properties of these environment controls. As for instance, we learned long ago to take a ship of the sea and you double her length by what you learned in geometry. The linear is 2. It used to be 1. Therefore, the surface is 2 to the second power is 4. And the volume is 2 to the third power is 8. So every time you double the length of a ship, you have 8 times the payload, only 4 times the amount of surface of friction to drive through the sea. So the friction per payload is ship bigger and bigger ship. So that's about. I find that in developing environmental geodesic domes, every time I double the size of the diameter of that dome, I have 8 times many molecules of atmosphere inside, but only 4 times my surface of the roof. Every time I double the size, I halve the amount of surface which the interior molecule could gain or lose heat. The energy efficiency goes up incredibly rapidly. I've discovered that a dome the size, go over mid-Manhattan in New York, that's 2 miles wide in diameter, is such that the amount of surface of the dome itself compared to the building standing below, going from 22nd Street up to 62nd Street, from East River to the Hudson, the amount of surface of the building standing below is 85 times the surface of my dome. That's all that surface exposed to lose and gain heat. So incredible amounts of energy we're doing it. By putting a single counting over it, you reduce the heat losses or gains 85-fold. Furthermore, you have the stability, the amount of sun impoundment, the amount of interference of the wind is such that New York City could be an energy exporter. Not have to buy any energy whatsoever. Properly designed. So I'm able to say to you some really quite important things regarding our production capabilities. As a student for 50 years of the world's resources, where is the iron, where is the tin, where are the 92 regenerative chemical elements, where they may be. We only have 91 on our planet here. I have to know whether they're recirculating. As for instance, we have no tin mines in the United States. We get our tin from the Malay Straits in Bolivia, Tanganyika. But we have the largest tin mine in the world back of the airplane plants in California. What we call Kirksite, for what we call soft tooling, to quickly change in the drop hammer design. We have the largest mine is above grade. It's not under grade in the water. I have to know where my resources in the world are, and I do. I'm able then to say categorically, with the complete design all accomplished, checked by many others, is now highly feasible within 10 years with the technology we've already proven, with the metals we've already mined, recirculating, not doing any more mining. It's highly feasible to get all humanity living at a higher standard of living than any humans have ever experienced, all of humanity, while during that 10 years completely phasing out all further use of fossil fuels or atomic energy. We live entirely on our energy income. I'm then saying I've discovered it within 10 years that it's feasible not only for human beings to be all as successful, to give up forever the idea you have to earn a living, not enough to go around. I've really discovered that our political system is invalid. There is enough to go around. The working premise is not, and the fact that no political system even knows what a building weighs, how ignorant can you get? Boy, this really wants you to really feel this thing. Go on building more and more of these junky buildings just to keep people busy. Say everybody has to have a job. 90% of all the jobs we have are not producing any life support. They're all in the fear industry. Insurance, reinsurance for insurance. Check up on your bank account. Checking out whether somebody's stealing your bank account. Check out if you're really paying your taxes. All that's some nonsense. We find that in the calendar, just in my lifetime, we didn't know anything about galaxies when I was young. We had the galactic, the Milky Way was called, the way galaxy comes from the word galactic or Milky Way. Hubble, I'm 28 when Hubble discovered the other galaxies. Just in the time since then, we've learned of 1 billion galaxies. We've identified them, photographed them. Right. The rate of increase of our information reaching outwardly is enormous. We're in what I call the invisible era, invisible reality. When I was born, reality is everything you see, smell, touch, and hear. That is still the reality of the newspaper, still the reality of the advertising. Electron was discovered when I'm 3 years of age, and nobody knew that. There's not in the newspaper about that. Nobody knows going on to anything. It's just in some scientific paper. But anyway, we have by 1930 the great electromagnetic spectrum. We identified each of the chemical elements has a unique electromagnetic frequencies, which can be seen with a spectrograph when you have an element incandescent in an arc flame. We have today, with the great electromagnetic spectrum, where you and I can smell, see, touch, and hear, is less than a millionth of reality. We're 99.99% operative in the realms of the electromagnetic spectrum reality that are non-directly contactable by our senses. 99.9% of everything is going to affect our lives tomorrow is being conducted by instruments in invisible ranges. So we don't really see what's going on. And our newspaper really dealing in this superficial to the poor political guy. You put him out in front and ask him to do things. He has a slight idea. Doesn't understand design. Doesn't understand technology. His military, so he turns to things over his military to use that technology. Spends billions on that. I now come right back to the idea then of energy accounting. What's going on with 1 billion galaxies? Our galaxy, 100 billion stars, 100 billion stars. And we know 1 billion of those galaxies, and it's operating very successfully. And this whole accounting is what it called, is really astrophysics, it's all energy accounting. Energy behaviors are the generalized principle I'm talking about, are operating through the whole show. And each of our energy, everything's everywhere transforming. Transforming following most incredibly accurate laws and rules. So energy associated this way and disassociate that way. Yes, the terminal association has meant matter, and then we can turn it into radiation and write it around again. And as far as the whole accounting goes, we've discovered that the universe itself, no energy being created, no energy being lost. That is, we have an eternally regenerative universe. We used to talk about perpetual motion machines, but we found this perpetual motion machine has some friction here, whatever there. The minimum perpetual motion machine of the universe is the universe. It's the minimum number of intercomplementary feedbacks to take care of eternal regeneration without any loss whatsoever. The universe is operating 100% efficiency. Now, economy here on our planet right now, I'm just going to give you the North American because I don't have China and so forth. But in North America, our design use of materials and information is so poor. I want you to understand, a reciprocating engine we have in our automobiles, 15% efficient, that's all you get out. 85% is lost, of the energy is lost. turbines are 30% efficient, jets are 65% efficient, what we call fuel cells are 85% efficient. The way we're using our energies on our planet, in the United States right now, where I find that there are 2 million cars always standing in front of red lights with the engine going, that we're only getting 5% out of all the energy that we consume. 95, if we are using petroleum, which we don't need to use anymore, but out of every 100 barrels of petroleum, 95 go down the flush, doing no good, just due to bad design, bad organization. I had a very great oil geologist who was such a good geologist in general, who was able to write a scenario for me of nature making petroleum, going all the way from the original photosynthesis of the sun into the algae and into vegetation, and the gradual residues of these things getting buried more and more deeply, getting finally through rivers and ice ages and so forth, getting enough concentration of these residues and enough pressure and enough heat for enough time to finally become petroleum. He was able then to write me that scenario, how long it would take, and we found that the rate that you and I pay for energy to the public utility, kilowatt hours, the amount of energy to make 1 gallon of petroleum, the amount of energy is pressure and heat for that amount of time, runs into over $1 million a gallon. The way the universe is being accounted, it costs nature over $1 million to produce each gallon of petroleum we have. Okay? We have all these fake jobs. The 90% are not producing any life support, just bureaucracies checking the power structure, keeping everybody busy, earning a living to its satisfaction. So we have people going using 2 and 3 gallons a day to go to work and produce no life support. If I take all the people and all the automobiles around our world that are going to all the jobs that don't produce anything, you'll find that we are spending something like over $1 trillion a day of nature energy. How long is the nature going to let us go on with that kind of nonsense? We're here to use our minds and not a power structure and just be absolutely overwhelmed as we are. We are all overwhelmed by nobody really having anything to say what's going on. And that picking the politician who doesn't understand the design revolution. I now know the option to make it on our planet by really using our minds. And how are we going to get to use those minds? How can the 99% who don't understand science and technology catch on to science and technology, and so they can use the design? So we as a people can spontaneously do things. One of the most impressive things you learn as a sailor is that no sooner do you really go to sea than you suddenly get to say, know all the ropes. But you know every fastening on the boat pretty soon. You know every valve, you know everything. You know all the personalities, you know them intimately. You know who can do what best. When you come to any crisis on a ship, you don't need any politician to tell you what to do. The sailors just spontaneously cooperate because they all know what it's all about. You can't cooperate and make sense unless you all know what it's all about. So you all do the logical things together, and everybody does it that way. You don't have some politician saying you didn't pay me any dues, so you can't. You have to pull that rope over there. I just see then that we are at a bind where how do we get the 99% to understand that a design revolution can help us make it, to get out of the way forever, ever and ever, ever, that you have to earn a living. That we're just normally meant to be in the universe, we have given our minds to have access to principles of the universe. We've been designed to be here as local information gatherers, to develop instruments and get this information, which we have 11.5 billion light years around us. We have light from all those billion galaxies running through the spectroscope, and little human beings on our planet, absolutely negligible in size. We have the inventory of the relative abundance of all the chemical elements present within that 11.5 billion light years around us. 11.5 billion light years is multiplied by 6.5 trillion miles to get the kind of mountains I'm talking about. That we have that kind of a reach with our minds. Now muscle, what is it? Nothing. And muscle is in control of human affairs right now. I say we've brought here not only as information gatherers, but access to principles of the universe by which we can solve local problems. That we are part of the great design of the universe is it's eternally regenerative, that everything is intercomplementary. And there's some problems that are really very difficult in the universe, where there's some possibilities that human beings could be designed. It's part of the design that human beings could be designed and misbehave very badly. And there has to be then a capability to cope with it in order to have an eternally regenerative universe. I think we're very much sort of it's really kind of experimental laboratory of God, of how much trouble you can really get into and how to get out of it. But I'm certainly confident that when the universe has an important function and the chances of it surviving a push, it makes many starts. To be sure that the vegetation really gets on, that this tree has its functions impound the sun radiation, so it can't have its young in its shadow because it couldn't have any radiation impound. So the tree has to launch its seeds in the wind, hoping that some of them will get out there and land someplace where they'll prosper. So nature makes, the chances of those seeds from the tree prospering is so poor that nature makes incredible starts. One of the things we really startled by the number of seeds coming out of any one of those trees. I say that nature having a need for you and I as local problem solvers. What is common to all lives and all history? Problems, problems, problems. If any good problem solving, you get worse problems. It's not something you get out of, you get more out of. But you can at least get the satisfaction of solving a problem intelligently, looking for the principles in the universe that are operative that you use to solve it. So it isn't unhappy work as you begin to really learn to be a good problem solver. But we're here then as local information gatherers regarding local problems of the universe and related to the integrity of eternal regeneration of the universe, and we're given problem-solving capability to solve those. We're being faced with an incredible problem right now. How do we organize ourselves then? 99% scientifically, technically illiterate. This brought me then around to saying, all right, if nature is not using pi, what is she using? Quite clearly, chemistry shows you she's disassociating whole, rational, low-order numbers. Beautiful H2O. No H pi O. So I said, maybe we can catch on to nature's own coordinate system. And nature's coordinate system is physically provable and always experimental evidence for. Maybe we can catch on to what is its structure. What makes things hold their shape? Why does a bubble hold its shape? Why does a bubble get to the point where it bursts? What's going on here? That's a sort of mystery where they say, poof, that's a huge probability? No. We find that really is incredible structure going on there. And the point where we have then liquids have double bond. So the liquid membrane on a bubble is double bonded. The minute it goes to single bond is gas. Simply, it turns into gas. Didn't burst, it turns into gas. The atoms rearrange themselves. That's a beautiful design, but you can know about these things. So this brought me to what I call synergetics in mathematics, and I do have this book, Mathematics Synergetics, and it is now going to its third printing. And we have volume number 2 written with another 1,100 pages, and that's mostly already set up in print. But I'm absolutely confident we have found the coordinate system of nature. And the coordinate system of nature does make possible anybody understanding nature's own principles associated with how she structures what she does. So I'm confident that it is possible overnight, educationally, to get somewhere. I hear parents complaining about all their kids sitting latched onto that television. They say they're not getting anywhere. The kids are, but what are we giving them? Incredible junk. And you could give them the technology of how nature makes things. That's actually what the kids want to know. Let them just have something. No, we have all the fear structure. All the people have jobs at educational institutions. All that tenure. The fear is everywhere, and the fear is not really of the individual, but the people who are dependent on them and so forth. That's really often very much love and gender. But the point is there's fear everywhere. And our educational system is hindering letting the little child get just what he wants of that beautiful screen he's latching onto spontaneously. Let the synergetics come in over that TV all around the world, really put on some really good programs which we know how to do, And we will probably lick the greatest hurdle we have. We'll make it possible for the 99% around the world. We have something, we got our satellites, we got our relays. We really can put on some programs coming in every television set around the world where you really get some information. How and why you and I 60% water? Is that just because nature didn't know how to fill up? Boy, no, it's because we use liquids are non-compressible. Liquids distribute their loads. We are compressibly, all of our compression is done by hydraulics. How do engineers and architects build buildings? Crystalline compression. Doesn't distribute any loads. We had to, when you had machinery on the road, we finally had to put a pneumatic tire that distributes some loads. Gases distribute loads, but they're compressible. Liquids distribute loads, but they're non-compressible, so the tree will hold its shape. When you see all those insects hitting your windshield, why does it turn to water? Because they were hydraulically compression. Distribute their loads. They could do that beautiful flying simply because they had the right engineering to distribute this loads. Right. The ignorance of humanity about this, think what an ignorance you have. I find people often saying, oh yeah, I'm really a pretty good mechanic, and I'm a hot rod, and I know all about my automobile. I've asked many audiences. I was fascinated recently. I was at an engineering school, engineering university, and they thought themselves ready. They are ranked as one of the high engineering educational institutions. So I said, I have all the faculty here and everything. I'd like you to tell me why, when you're steering your car, and you turn your wheel like this, you let go, it comes back to the center. What brings it back to the center? And somebody said, maybe it's caster. No, it's caster. Caster is a vertical hinge. You see many of the caster you have on your supermarket wagons. They're simply a vertical hinge and then a wheel back here. So if you push this way, the wheel trails. If you had casters on your automobile, the minute your automobile would be on the side of a hill, the weight of the car would make that wheel steer you right in the middle of the traffic. Wham! There are no casters there whatsoever, I assure you. Why does it do what it does? Well, because we have the kingpin, or the equivalent mathematically much more complex, but we have then the front wheels. We have a kingpin pointing sideways at the exact center of the tire. And when you rotate your wheel and goes and makes that kingpin rotate, it makes the tire, the wheel rotate, which means that the point where the kingpin is pointing at is on the wheel, which you lift, literally, when you rotate the wheel, you lift the front end of your car a half an inch. And the weight of the car makes it come back to the center. When you're rolling, then it's easy for the wheels to adjust themselves. When not, it's quite hard to turn your car, because you're actually lifting that car gradually front end with all the friction in the tire. So it's very hard for you to do it at the curb, not in motion. But the minute you're in motion, she's rolling, she very quickly allows herself to come around. That's 5 centers. And I didn't find a single engineer in that engineering school who knew that. That was discovered by a designer long ago, and they've been doing it ever since. But I find we don't really understand the most simplest things in our lives. And I now know it is highly feasible to use that television. We have to give up all the school systems. The only people who should be around any campus would be people who just love with teaching, who want to qualify somehow humanity to trust them, that they really knew something. And then they will be on teams making the right video programs that go out. Whether we have still going on simply because we have good laboratories at the university, we will have production teams there turning out the right cassette programs. It would be possible for any kid anywhere around the world to dial instantly. He wants information. Instead of looking it up in the encyclopedia, he can dial for it and get the most reliable information. We'd start doing that, and we're going to stay on our planet. Because then humanity is going to know what it's all about and how to cooperate spontaneously. What we need to be unblocked so we can really cooperate. I've been asked to meet audiences averaging 1,500 about every 4 days for the last 5 years, and they're all very much in the kind of mood you're going to find yourself. They realize they are blocked. They would like to cooperate. I say, my whole hope that we're going to make it, however, is I know the older people are full of that fear. And the bureaucracy, they're so used to what the game will put up with, they just simply hold on with the game. So I see every child being born in the presence of less misinformation. I realized that I really was born with my people who loved me very much telling me it's inherently impossible for a man to fly. Wireless, how crazy can you get? All those things I was being told. I was being told, never mind what you think. It was assumed that the young people had most unreliable cerebral equipment. That you had to be taught, had to find out what the system said. I find that in a young world coming through, finding the older world, quite clearly the parents who used to be the authority in my life, suddenly the parents are listening to the radio. So Daddy is listening to radio, Mom is, so the radio must be the authority. And the kids suddenly realize that with the television that Mom and Dad loved it to pieces, but Mom and Dad didn't have anything to do with going to the moon or anything. So the kids said, we've got to do our own thinking. Nature simply really literally brought about an artifact, the television, where the information you get visually is 1,000,000 times what you can get through your ear, where a young world has a new tool and it's really been challenged into realizing the whole world is in trouble, not the local community, and that we can go to the moon, we can do anything we want. We have a young world being born since the moon man got over to the moon and back successfully, and I'm getting letters from 8-year-olds written incredibly well, beautiful syntax, and they found this, I'm somebody they could write to, let me know about their concern that they know we can do anything we want, why aren't we making the world work? So there's a young world coming through, not only less misinformed, but also much more reliable information available to it. What we really can do. So I got a young world coming through, building up a momentum of doing its own thinking and getting out from all the conditioned reflexes that I have. I have an incredible number of badly conditioned reflexes that I just can't cope with. The young man sitting in the front row here, who'd been in the front row, I never know where I'm going to see him next, but all around the country, in fact, around the world, I guess I do. One day he told me I'd said up and down many times during my talk. I've forgotten what the count was, something very large. And I'd simply told the audience that the words up and down have no meaning. But my conditioned reflexes such I spontaneously let that darn thing out. When I'm writing, I eliminate it altogether. Because I can see it, because I can review it, but I can't review my own sounds. They come, conditioned reflex, spew them out. So I have a young world with not ill-conditioned reflexes and much more reliable information. So nature quite clearly is bringing in a whole new crop who really probably will be able to hold their momentum, doing their own thinking. So I can see, I know we have the option to make it. I see that young world coming through, but all my hope is that young world. Anyway, I think we've come really a good time now. So we have the option to make it. We don't have to have the idea it has to be you and me ever again. And I want you to think about that little spaceship where it's going to have to be everybody and nobody, and where we would cut down the restraints on human beings. We increase their health. We increase their opportunities to get the information they really want and need. They ought to be able to make contributions to one another. They ought to be able to cooperate with one another. All the potentials really are there. Whether we're going to make it, I think, is absolutely touch and go. And really, I think either we really qualify to stay here by getting to use our minds, which we're here for, and not our muscles, which are now running things. By my score, the way I've tried to see, I've done enormous plotting of world resource and human trends over the last half century, and my curve suggests that by 1985 we will have to have mind really in control. If mind's in control, it'll be because it's been able to learn what that technology is by learning its synergetics and realizing that a design revolution will really work, and enacting a spontaneous undertaking to do it, to solve the problems by the design revolution and not by politics. All right. It's amazing to, only by virtue of my really getting out with the game 50 years ago when I was really a throwaway, and seeing things from the outside, and there's just enough inventory of new capability that had come to humanity, we'd come to some kind of a critical point of humanity where there was enough information at last to make it possible to see that you could do more than that, to make it possible to see what I could see. I'm absolutely confident, I said outlet that I'm not unusual, but I have the same human faculties, but I really got pushed out of the regular game as an outsider, either saying I'm to do away with myself or to use myself as a resource and do my own thinking, trying to see where I was in relation to all this new information. I could see there was the possibility of doing so much more with less, we might be able to take care of everybody. And 50 years later, I'm now absolutely clearly demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt. So, help your young people every kind of way you can. Thank you.
Although he claims to be an average man, I think you have just heard one of the world's truly great persons, and the School of Environmental Design and Cal Poly is very grateful for Art Buckminster Fuller's generosity in agreeing to appear with us today. Thank you very much.